I trusted my mother-in-law to watch our house while we were away. Instead, she sold my restored 1967 Mustang, a car worth $45,000, for just $3,000. Now, I'm taking this battle all the way to court. For as long as I can remember, I had this one dream burning in my chest, a 1967 Ford Mustang. Not just any car, but the car. The kind of machine that growls when you turn the key, the kind that smells like history and freedom, the kind that makes you feel like you've grabbed life by the horns. I wasn't born rich. I didn't stumble into some inheritance or win the lottery. Every penny for that car came from sweat, overtime shifts, and skipping nights out with friends. Years of it. Saying no to vacations, dodging fancy dinners, squirreling away every spare dollar until I had enough to make it mine. When I finally found her, a beat-up shell of a Mustang in some guy's barn 2 states over, I could barely breathe. She was rough. Rust chewed through her fenders, the engine was a seized-up mess, and the interior looked like a family of raccoons had thrown a party in it. But I saw what she could be. I handed over $12,000, every cent I'd saved, and towed her home. That was 4 years ago. For years of late nights in the garage, hands black with grease, back aching from hunching over the hood. I rebuilt the engine piece by piece, tracked down original parts online, sanded and painted her until she gleamed midnight blue. My wife would poke her head in sometimes, laughing about how I loved that car more than her. I'd grin and say it was close, but she always won. Mostly. It wasn't just a car to me. It was proof I could build something real, something lasting. By the time I finished, she was worth over $45,000, appraised by a guy who knows classics. I'd take her out on weekends, feeling the rumble through the steering wheel, watching heads turn. People would stop me at gas stations, asking questions, snapping pics. That Mustang was my pride, my reward for years of grinding. My little slice of victory. But not everyone saw it that way. My mother-in-law, Barbara, never got it. She'd roll her eyes every time I mentioned the car, muttering about how I was throwing money away on old junk. She'd come over, glance at the garage, and launch into lectures about how I should have invested in something practical instead, like her pyramid scheme vitamins she swore would make us rich. I'd nod, bite my tongue, and let it slide. She didn't need to understand. The Mustang wasn't for her. It was mine. That's how it started, me and my dream car, finally whole after years of work. I had no idea how fast it could all unravel. 2 weeks ago, my wife and I left for a vacation, our first in years. A little beach getaway, just the two of us. I locked up the house, checked the garage one last time, and asked Barbara to keep an eye on things. She lived close, and she'd done it before without burning the place down. I figured it was fine. The Mustang sat there under a tarp, safe and sound. Or so I thought. I didn't know I was handing her the match to light my whole world on fire. The vacation was a dream Sarah and I had nursed for years, a 2-week getaway to Hawaii, just the two of us basking in sun and sea. It felt like a hard-earned prize after all the sacrifices, the late nights I'd spent hunched over the Mustang, and the relentless grind of everyday life. Sarah deserved it as much as I did. She tolerated my obsession with that car, the endless chatter about carburetors, the way I'd disappear into the garage until midnight. When we finally booked the trip, I was electric with excitement. Sandy beaches, cold drinks, no alarms jolting us awake. I could feel it already. Before we left, I made sure everything was buttoned up tight. The house was locked down, windows secured, alarm armed. The Mustang got special treatment. I eased her into the garage, checked the oil one last time like a nervous parent, and pulled a thick cover over her gleaming body. That car was my heart. I wasn't risking a scratch. The garage door slammed shut, and I tested the lock twice. Solid. Sarah laughed, saying I treated it like a vault, but I just smirked. She didn't need to get it. Barbara was the final piece. She lived 10 minutes away, always meddling in our business, so asking her to watch the house seemed like a no-brainer. She'd done it before, kept the plants alive, grabbed the mail, nothing fancy. Sarah called her, and Barbara jumped at the chance, her voice a little too chipper. I should have noticed that edge, that hint of something off, but I was already mentally on a beach, sipping a Mai Tai. I handed her the spare key, ran through the basics, don't touch the thermostat, feed the cat, and we were done. We hugged her goodbye, tossed our bags in the car, and headed for the airport. Hawaii was pure bliss. Sarah and I swam in crystal clear water, hiked lush trails, ate pineapple until our tongues burned. For 2 weeks, I forgot about work, bills, the grease under my nails. The Mustang flickered into my thoughts once or twice, but I brushed it off. She was safe, covered, waiting. I had no idea what was simmering back home. Barbara had that key, and while we were lounging under the stars, she was scheming. I trusted her with my dream, blind to how little it meant to her or how much trouble she was in. The fuse was lit, and I was halfway across the ocean, clueless. The flight back from Hawaii was long, but Sarah and I were still riding the high of those 2 weeks, tan, rested, laughing about how we'd almost missed the plane home chasing one last sunset. The cab dropped us off late, the street quiet under a blanket of stars. I lugged our bags to the porch, already picturing a cold beer and a peek at the Mustang to cap the night. But as we rounded the corner to the driveway, something hit me like a brick to the chest. The garage door was wide open. Not just unlocked, gaping, like a wound. And inside, nothing. No tarp, no midnight blue gleam, no Mustang. Just an empty slab of concrete staring back at me. My stomach dropped. I bolted forward, dropping the bags, heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Theft. That was the only word screaming through my head. Someone had broken in, jacked my car. My dream, gone in a blink. I spun around, scanning the street, half expecting to see taillights fading in the distance. Sarah grabbed my arm, her voice shaky, asking what was wrong, but I couldn't even answer. My hands were trembling as I fumbled for my phone to call the cops. For years of work, $45,000 worth of blood and sweat, stolen while I was sipping cocktails. I wanted to puke. Then the front door swung open, and there was Barbara, bouncing out like she'd just won the lottery. Her face was all grins, eyes bright, hands clapping together as she rushed toward us. My panic froze, confusion taking over. She didn't even pause, just launched into it, her great news. She'd sold the Mustang. My Mustang. The old scrap, she called it, waving a hand like it was some rusty lawnmower I'd been too lazy to toss. She'd done it to surprise us, she said, beaming like she deserved a medal. Said she'd handled everything while we were gone, got rid of that money pit for us. I couldn't process it. My brain locked up, stuck on her words. Sold, scrap, surprise. Sarah went stiff beside me, her grip tightening on my arm. I stared at Barbara, her smug little smile, and felt something snap inside. Theft would have been better, at least I could fight a thief. But this? My own mother-in-law, waltzing in with her favor, obliterating everything I'd built? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Rage and disbelief choked me silent. The garage gaped behind her, empty as a grave, and all I could think was how the hell this had happened, and what I was going to do about it. The air felt thick, like I was drowning in it, as Barbara stood there grinning, oblivious to the storm tearing through me. I finally found my voice, hoarse and shaking, demanding to know what she'd done, how she'd sold my Mustang. She shrugged, casual as if she'd offloaded a bag of old clothes, and started spilling the details. She'd sold it to Mike, the kid down the street, some scrappy 20-year-old who mowed lawns and tinkered with beaters in his driveway. $3,000. That's what she got. $3,000 for my dream, handed over like pocket change while I was gone. My knees buckled. I stumbled into the garage, staring at the empty space, trying to wrap my head around it. $3,000. The number burned in my skull, a sick joke. I spun back to her, barely holding it together, and yanked the appraisal out of my toolbox, a wrinkled paper I'd kept tucked away, proof of what that car was worth. I shoved it in her face, my hands shaking so bad the words blurred. $45,000. That's what a collector had valued it at, months ago, after I'd poured my soul into every bolt and curve. I pointed at the figure, jabbing the paper, yelling that this wasn't just an old car, it was my life's work, worth 15 times what she'd taken. Barbara blinked at it, her smile faltering for a second, then she tilted her head like a confused dog. She didn't get it. Not even a flicker of guilt. She squinted at the appraisal, then back at me, and muttered that it was just an old car. Anyway, why was I so bent out of shape over some hobby? Said Mike was thrilled, that she'd done us a favor getting rid of the clunker taking up space. A favor. My vision tunneled, red creeping in at the edges. I wanted to scream, to shake her until she understood the gaping hole she'd ripped into my world. $3,000 to a kid who probably didn't even know what he had, while I'd sunk years and tens of thousands into it. Sarah stepped in, voice tight, trying to calm me down, but I could barely hear her over the roar in my head. Barbara just stood there, arms crossed now, doubling down, saying I was overreacting, that money was money, and I could buy something useful with the cash. I couldn't even look at her. My dream, my Mustang, gone for pennies, and she didn't even see the problem. It wasn't just a car she'd sold. It was me, my trust, my everything, handed off to some punk for a fraction of its soul. The living room felt like a pressure cooker, the air thick with tension as I paced, fists clenched, still clutching that crumpled appraisal. Sarah hovered between me and Barbara, her face pale, eyes darting back and forth like she was trying to hold two crumbling walls together. I couldn't sit. Every nerve was on fire, the image of that empty garage searing my mind. Barbara plopped onto the couch, arms folded, looking more annoyed than sorry. I turned on her, voice cracking as I demanded answers. How could she do this? How could she not ask me first? How could she think that car was hers to sell? She huffed, rolling her eyes like I was the unreasonable one, and started spinning excuses. She didn't know the wreck was worth anything. She'd seen it sitting there, collecting dust, and figured it was trash I'd been too lazy to ditch. Her tone was sharp, defensive, like I'd insulted her genius. She thought she was helping, she said, freeing up the garage, getting us some quick cash. Helping. The word twisted in my gut like a knife. I slammed the appraisal on the coffee table, jabbing at the $45,000 figure again, shouting that this wasn't some junker. This was my dream, my sweat, my years of work. She just shrugged, muttering she wasn't a car person, like that excuse torching my life. Sarah's voice broke through, small and pleading, asking me to calm down, saying we'd figure it out. But I saw the split in her eyes, half with me, half with her mom. She reached for my arm, but I pulled away, too raw to be touched. Barbara was her mother, sure, but this was betrayal, and I couldn't pretend otherwise. I wheeled back to Barbara, cutting through her nonsense, and demanded the car back. Now, I didn't care what she'd done with the money or what Mike thought. He didn't own it, not really. It was mine, and I wanted it back in my garage where it belonged. Barbara's face hardened. She snapped that it was sold, done, out of her hands. Mike had the keys, the cash was spent, and I needed to let it go. Spent. That word hit like a punch. On what? She wouldn't say, just glared at me like I was the villain for wanting my own damn car. Sarah sank onto the couch, head in her hands, caught in the crossfire as I towered over her mother, fury boiling over. I wasn't backing down, not from this. That Mustang was mine, and I'd fight tooth and nail to get it back, no matter who stood in my way. The next morning, I was up before dawn, exhaustion drowned out by a simmering rage that wouldn't let me sleep. I marched down the street to Mike's house, the kid who'd scored my Mustang for a laughable $3,000. His place was a mess, lawn overgrown, a rusted pickup in the driveway, and there she was, my midnight blue beauty, parked crooked like a trophy he didn't deserve. Seeing her there, out of my garage, twisted the knife deeper. I banged on his door until he shuffled out, greasy hair and a smug grin, acting like he'd won the deal of the century. I didn't waste time, told him the car wasn't Barbara's to sell, that I wanted it back now. Mike leaned against the doorframe, smirking, and said no dice. He had papers, he claimed, some slapped-together bill of sale with Barbara's signature scrawled across it, listing her as the owner. Said he'd paid fair and square, and it was his now. I could feel my pulse in my temples, every word out of his mouth pushing me closer to losing it. I told him the car was mine, titled in my name, worth 10 times what he'd paid, but he just shrugged, saying he didn't care about my sob story. Deal's done. Take it up with Barbara. I stormed back home, head spinning, and called the only person I could think of, a lawyer buddy from years back who owed me a favor. I laid it all out. The Mustang, Barbara's sale, Mike's smug refusal. He didn't sugarcoat it. The sale was garbage. Barbara had no legal right to sell it. The title was in my name, not hers. No matter what she'd scribbled on that paper, it didn't mean squat. The car was still mine under the law, and Mike holding on to it was possession of stolen property, plain and simple. Relief hit me for a split second. Finally, a lifeline. Then the weight crashed back. Getting it back wouldn't be easy. The lawyer warned me it could get messy. Mike had the car and a contract, flimsy as it was, and Barbara's meddling made it personal. I need to file a police report for theft, sue for the return of my property, maybe even press charges if it came to that. My stomach churned at the thought. Court, cops, dragging this out while my Mustang sat in some punk's driveway. But I didn't have a choice. Barbara had lit the match, Mike was fanning the flames, and I was done playing nice. This was war now, and I'd fight with everything I had to bring my car home. The house was a battlefield by noon, tension crackling like static as I tried to piece together my next move. Sarah was in the kitchen, silent, avoiding my eyes, while Barbara parked herself at the dining table, sipping coffee like nothing was wrong. I couldn't take it anymore, her sitting there, smug and unbothered, after torching my world. I slammed the appraisal down again, demanding she explain how she thought she could sell my Mustang. Her excuse this time nearly broke me. She leaned back, cool as ice, and said it was simple. Sarah and I were married, so everything was joint property. As Sarah's mother, she figured she had the right to step in. She actually believed it, her twisted logic laid out like some warped family entitlement. I stared at her, dumbfounded, the words sinking in slow and heavy. Joint property? My Mustang, bought with my money, restored with my hands, titled in my name alone, was somehow hers to sell because she birthed my wife? It was so absurd I almost laughed, but the fury swallowed it whole. Sarah flinched, finally looking up, her face a mix of shame and disbelief, but she didn't say a word. I didn't need her till Barbara's delusion was loud enough. She went on, saying she'd only wanted to help, that I was ungrateful, that I'd left the car abandoned in the garage. Every syllable was gasoline on the fire. I called my lawyer again. pacing the living room, voice tight as I relayed her latest defense. He cut through the nonsense fast. The Mustang was mine, period. I bought it 2 years before Sarah, and I tied the knot, my savings, my purchase, my name on every document. Marriage didn't magically make it joint, under the law, especially not with the title crystal clear. Barbara had zero claim, and her, "I'm Sarah's mom" card was worthless. He said it strengthened my case. Her admitting she acted on some half-baked assumption only dug her hole deeper. Theft, fraud, whatever we called it, she'd screwed herself. Relief battled with dread as I hung up. The law was on my side, but this was spiraling, Barbara doubling down, Sarah caught in the middle, and me ready to tear the world apart to get my car back. Barbara glared at me from the table, daring me to push harder, while Sarah's silence screamed louder than words. The fight was escalating, and I knew it'd get uglier before it was over. My Mustang wasn't just a car anymore. It was the line I'd die on. The clock was ticking, and every second felt like a hammer blow as I dug deeper into the mess Barbara had made. I'd barely slept, chasing leads, when I got a tip from a neighbor. Mike wasn't just sitting on the Mustang. He'd already listed it online, trying to flip it to some out-of-state collector for a fat profit. My stomach lurched as I pulled up the ad on my phone. There she was, my midnight blue baby, gleaming in blurry pics, priced at $40,000. That punk had no idea what he was doing, but he was moving fast, and if he closed the deal, my car could vanish across state lines before I could blink. Panic clawed at me. This wasn't just theft anymore. It was a race. I called my lawyer, voice shaking, and told him everything. He didn't hesitate, said we had to act now or lose her for good. Within hours, we filed an emergency motion with the court, a desperate plea to freeze the sale. He laid it out. The car was mine, illegally sold, and Mike had no right to profit off stolen property. The paperwork was a blur, affidavits, title copies, the appraisal, all rushed to a judge to stop that collector from wiring cash and hauling my Mustang away. It felt like grasping at smoke, but it was my only shot. Every minute waiting for the court's ruling was agony, imagining her loaded onto a trailer, gone forever. Then Sarah snapped. She'd been simmering all day, quiet but fraying, and it finally boiled over. She cornered me in the kitchen, eyes blazing, and let loose, said I was overreacting, dragging this too far, turning her mom into a villain over just a car. Her words hit like a slap. Just a car? I stared at her, gut twisting, unable to believe she'd shrunk it down like that. She didn't see the years, the sacrifice, the piece of me Barbara had ripped away. I fired back, voice low and raw, that it wasn't about the car, it was about trust, about her mother betraying us, about fighting for what's mine. She shook her head, tears welling, saying I was tearing the family apart over metal and paint. I walked away, chest tight, her accusation ringing in my ears. The court papers sat on the table, my last lifeline, while Sarah's words cut deeper than I'd expected. Mike was cashing in, Barbara was unrepentant, and now my wife was turning on me. The Mustang wasn't just slipping away, it was dragging everything I loved down with it. The courtroom was a pressure cooker, small and stuffy, the kind of place where every whisper echoed. The emergency motion pushed the case into an accelerated hearing, and there I was, sitting rigid, watching the judge flip through papers while my lawyer laid out the facts, my title, Barbara's fraud, Mike's greedy flip. It moved fast, too fast to breathe, but I clung to every word, praying the gavel would fall my way. Mike slouched in his seat, smirking like he still had a shot, while Barbara fidgeted beside her own cheap lawyer, her face a mask of irritation, until it cracked. She took the stand, and it all unraveled. At first, she stuck to her story, joint property, doing us a favor, but my lawyer pressed hard, tearing holes in her excuses. Then the tears came, big sobbing gulps, and the real reason spilled out. Casino debts. She'd been bleeding cash at the slots, racking up thousands she couldn't cover, and when we left for Hawaii, she saw the Mustang as her lifeline. She sold it to Mike, pocketed the $3,000, and blew it on a desperate bet to win big. Thought she'd have it all sorted, the car repurchased or the money replaced, before we got back. Her voice broke as she admitted it, hands twisting, saying she never meant to hurt us, just to fix her mess. The room went still. Sarah, beside me, sucked in a breath, her face crumpling as the betrayal sank in, her mom, gambling away our lives. I couldn't look at her. My eyes were locked on Barbara, rage and pity slugging it out in my chest. She'd torched my dream not for spite, but for her own reckless hole, and still thought she could magic it away. The judge didn't flinch, asked for proof, got none, just her sniffling confession. Mike's smirk faded as the lawyer hammered him too, knew the deal was shady, still tried to profit. The evidence piled up. My title, the appraisal, Barbara's own words burying her. It was over quick. The judge ruled the sale void, car was mine. Always had been. Mike had to return it, no payout, and Barbara faced potential charges if I pushed. She sobbed harder. Sarah gripped my hand, torn between us, and I just sat there, numb. Victory tasted bitter. My Mustang was coming home, but the cost was a family in shards and a mother-in-law's mask ripped off. All for her damn casino. The courtroom ruling landed like a thunderclap, final and unyielding. The judge declared the sale invalid, a legal mirage. My Mustang never belonged to Mike, never left my ownership. The title held firm, Barbara's signature on that sham paper meaningless. The car was ordered confiscated from Mike's grubby hands, towed back to my garage under police watch. He didn't go quietly, stormed out, swearing he'd sue Barbara for his $3,000, his lawyer already scribbling notes. I didn't care. Let them claw at each other. My baby was coming home. But the victory was hollow, shadowed by the wreckage left behind. Our family was a smoldering ruin. Sarah sat silent as we drove home, the Mustang's return a faint pulse against the ache between us. For days, she'd waffled, caught in the crossfire, but Barbara's casino confession shattered her denial. She finally saw it. The betrayal wasn't just mine to bear, it was ours. That night, she broke down, apologizing through tears for doubting me, for calling it just a car. She'd missed how deep the wound went, how her mom's lies had gutted us both. She swore she was with me now, fully, but the trust we'd lost lingered like smoke. Barbara was a ghost in our lives after that. The court didn't charge her, yet, but Mike's lawsuit loomed, and she crumbled under the weight. Sarah pushed her into treatment for the gambling addiction, a grim rehab stint funded by what little she had left. She'd call sometimes, voice shaky, promising she'd change, but the words rang empty. I couldn't look at her without seeing that empty garage, the $45,000 dream she'd gambled away. Sarah went to visit her, trying to mend something, but I stayed back. Trust wasn't coming back, not after this. The Mustang sat in the garage again, gleaming under the tarp, a bittersweet anchor. I'd won it back, fought tooth and nail, but the scars ran deep, family ties shredded, a marriage tested, a mother-in-law unmasked. Sarah and I were rebuilding, step by fragile step, her hand in mine stronger now. Barbara's recovery was her own battle, far from us. The car was mine, but the cost was a quiet house, a wary peace, and a lesson burned into my soul, some debts cut deeper than money.